what's your opinion of this play?
I love it. I think it's interesting. It has given us something to talk about. It's captivated all of America because of how effective it's been. But also, I think how the other teams that have tried to replicate it have not been able to do it. Because at the beginning of the season, people were saying, wow, we need to ban this play. It's unstoppable. It's not football-like. But as soon as you saw those other teams try to do it and fail, then I think everybody said, whoa, wait a minute. We can't ban this play because it's just the Eagles' execution of it that has made it so perfect. It's not the fact that it's some unstoppable play.
So then why is it so difficult to copycat it in this copycat league, Joe?
Well, the Eagles' offensive line is probably the biggest, most physical offensive line in the NFL. One. Two, their quarterback's, 240 pounds?
Right.
And now, also, they've had a lot of practice at it. It's something that I don't see a lot of teams lining up in training camp and doing this against each other. So I do think there is a learning curve, clearly. And the ability for the Eagles to have executed it properly a bunch of times in game-like scenarios where you're going live, I think it gives them the understanding of like the little minutia of the technique that it takes to be able to execute a play that's only trying to get a foot or two.
And so you mean you just heard Nick Sirianni say it's 1st and 9 for his team. So what an advantage, clearly, right? 1st and 9 for your team. So why wouldn't other teams practice it? Why wouldn't they figure out, let's just say somebody's right guard is particularly talented next to a center and go there in the same way that clearly Hurts is going to the left side pretty much every single time in between Dickerson and their future Hall of Famer. You're going to have a bust gallery roommate in Jason Kelsey one day. I think you can agree. So why don't other teams do that? Why don't they get the guys and practice it as long as it is legal, Joe?
I could see maybe next training camp teams trying to practice this, but to do that in the season, I think the injury risk is just way too high to try to line your guys up and go at it one after the other with the tush push or the brotherly shove during the season, because you also do have a ton of other stuff to work on. And can you imagine if reports came out that like some critical players, like your quarterback maybe, got injured in the middle of the season because you're trying to master the brotherly shove?
Right. Yeah. That would be a headline grabber, to say the least. So what's your philosophy on how to stop it? What would you do?
Yeah, well, I think what you need to do is you need to try to force them to do something else, right? Like you mentioned, like they haven't really thrown out of it, so let's force them to try to throw out of it. And what you want to do is basically what happens is the offensive and defensive lines are just creating a pile. And then it's almost like if you ever seen those hotels in Japan that are just these little tubes that are stacked on top of each other. Basically, the first level of tubes is your offensive and defensive lineman carcasses that are laying on the ground. And then the pushers for the Eagles are grabbing Jalen Hurts' carcass and sticking him up into the second floor tube and pushing him through that airspace that now is only occupied by the linebackers from the defense. And it's unfair because nobody's pushing those guys, right? So I think the first thing that you want to do is you want to get a push on the defensive lineman's tush, right? So you line up like they used to do with the field goal block, where you get your linebackers behind and they're actually pushing the tush of the defensive lineman in front of them, right? So you have pushes going against each other. So you're trying to create a pile and maybe at least stop the surge from the Eagles offensive line. And then the guys, as soon as things get stopped and you see Jalen Hurts getting pushed over the top, that's when those linebackers need to push Jalen Hurts back, right? But most importantly, you need to put players on the edge to be able to spike down as quickly as possible to knock the pushers off of Jalen, because that's really the key to this play. It's not that Jalen is able to keep his legs moving and work his way over the top. It's that he's actually getting his body pushed over the top of all these bodies that are laying on the ground. So what you need to do is go and tackle the pushers. And I know people will say, well, it's holding, you're not allowed to tackle a blocker. Well, those guys aren't blocking. They're pushing Jalen Hurts. So if you have guys on the edge or big linebackers or maybe even some big defensive ends, and you just have them spike down the edge as soon as the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line wedge, you can maybe knock those pushers off to be able to stop them from pushing Jalen Hurts over the top of the pile.
Okay, so let me take this one at a time. First of all, love the analogies.
Hope you wrote it down.
No, Joe, love the analogies. Amazing. So it's not about who's the lowest. Is that what you're saying? Because you see some of these defenders get down, like basically like their chests are almost damn near on the ground, that they're prone. You know, like those drills that we see at the combine where sometimes they start, on their chest and have to jump up and then run around. You're like, well, you're never in that position. It seems like defenders are getting down low. So you're saying it's not if you get down that low, you're helping the Eagles because they're creating the space for Hurts to basically body surf on top of the line that's protecting him or blocking for him, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
No?
So at first, the Eagles' offensive line was just lower than everybody, right? So they were getting this tremendous surge, but then everybody realized what was coming. So now they told their defensive linemen, we used to call it root hog, basically just get lower than them. And if you create a pile, that's okay, because now there's just a big pile and nobody else is blocking each other. But the Eagles use that to their advantage because now Jalen Hurts is body surfing on those bodies. So he's not touching the ground. So he's not going to be down, right?
Yeah.
So then that's where the push comes into play, where the Eagles, running backs or tight ends that are in the backfield picking up Jalen Hurts, they're pushing him over the top of those bodies and he's not touching the ground. So you got to be able to stop that body surf. It's not about being lower because the pile has already been created in front. So it's getting those pushers off of Jalen Hurts in any way possible so they can't body surf his body across the first down marker.
So you would be running the risk if you do put people, as you said, like back in the day, the type of field goal block scheme, if you're just blocking your big body defensive line, D tackles, if you're putting those folks out there, you are running the risk of maybe them pulling it and like pop passing it, right? Like, is that this is fascinating to me because this is the way this is going to go, and we're going to see this in a big, huge game, Joe. This is going to happen in November and December. For sure.
I guarantee the Eagles have practiced the other iterations of, okay, when people stop this, what do we do? Okay, we fake the push, then we just have a little pop pass, or we fake it and then we, throw some jet sweep or some option play where we can pitch it to somebody running around. And certainly you're going to have your safeties as safety valves to be looking for some of those things when you're on defense. But I think if you're going to try to stop this, you got to try to sell out just the same way that the Eagles are trying to sell out to get it. And I think that's the only way you can do it. But that's what's exciting about this play. And that's why I don't want it banned and outlawed, because there's so many iterations that we haven't even got to yet that are going to be so fun for us to explore as this thing evolves.
So which team do you think defensively is best equipped to do what you're saying? Just if you go through a roster, I mean, they just played the Rams for crying out loud, right? I mean, there's Aaron Donald on the other side of it. Who do you think has the ability with the bodies to stop this thing? Joe.
Good question.
Thank you.
I haven't studied everybody's size and weights on the defensive lines and linebacker, but I would say that actually having huge defensive linemen, that's great. But I think having those big linebackers on the second level might actually be more critical to be able to initially push the defensive line, go over the top to try to stop Jalen Hurts, and then having big bodies on the outside, or at least fast guys, to be able to get to those pushers and either tackle them or knock them off the push would potentially be the most important skills of these players that are going to be out there on the defense.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.